You know the story of Jacob, don't you? Leah and Rachel, the drama of unrequited love, the sibling rivalry, the 12 sons who became the tribes of Israel. But wait a moment. Jacob's other wife, who almost no one remembers, but changed everything, is about to be revealed. What if I told you there's a character in Jacob's story who has been virtually erased from sermons, Bible studies, and even our collective memory? A woman who, even in silence, gave birth to warriors. Even though forgotten, she kept promises. Even though invisible to the world, she was seen and valued by God. Tradition has a curious tendency to highlight certain figures while others remain in the shadows. We speak of Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, and Rachel. But we rarely mention the one who was also part of this sacred lineage, the one who also waited, trusted, and watched her children grow up carrying the DNA of divine promise. Why are some biblical narratives told and retold while others remain hidden? Is it just coincidence? Or is there something deeper going on here? Something that shakes our concepts of value, importance, and purpose? What you are about to discover will forever change the way you view not only Jacob's story, but also your own place in God's plan. The story begins much earlier than we imagine. Because when we talk about Jacob and his wives, we're not just talking about two, we're talking about four. Imagine the scene. Jacob had worked 14 years for the loves of his life, Leah and Rachel. But fate had something much more complex in store. Each of these sisters brought with her a servant, Bilhah, Rachel's servant, and Zilpah, Leah's servant. These women were not just servants, they would become mothers of the tribes of Israel. Jacob's family dynamics were intense and tense. Leah, the despised one, fought desperately for her husband's love through the children she bore. Rachel, the beloved, suffered from infertility, which seemed to deny her special place in Jacob's heart. And there, in the shadows of this emotional struggle, stood Bilhah and Zilpah, watching, serving, waiting. When Rachel found herself unable to conceive, she made a decision that would change everything. Here is my servant Bilhah, go to her, that she may bear children on my knees, and that I may receive children through her. Genesis 33. It was a cultural practice of the time, but imagine the emotional impact for everyone involved. But something was happening that no one could have foreseen. These simple servants were about to write one of the most important pages in biblical history. Have you ever imagined living your entire life competing for love? That was the reality for Leah and Raquel. Leah woke every day knowing she wasn't the one Jacob had chosen. Her eyes were tender, some translate as dull, others as delicate. But one thing was certain, they never shone with the love she so longed to see reflected in her husband's gaze. Each child she bore was a desperate attempt. Now, this time, my husband will cling to me. On the other hand, Rachel lived the paradox of being loved, but unable to give Jacob what mattered most in that culture: offspring. Barrenness was not just a physical condition, it was a constant source of shame and despair. "Give me children, or I die," was her cry of anguish, recorded in Genesis 30:1. This rivalry between the sisters created a domestic environment fraught with tension, jealousy, and competition. Each pregnancy was a victory for one and a defeat for the other. Each name given to the children carried a message, a cry of pain or renewed hope. But while Leah and Rachel played out this drama center stage, two other women watched silently. They too had beating hearts, pulsating dreams, and a dignity that would be tested by the events to come. But what happens when those in the shadows also need to find their place in the story? When the supporting characters discover they also have a key role to play? The Bible uses a word that can be confusing: handmaid. But were Bilhah and Zilpah really just that? Before we continue discovering this potentially life-changing truth, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. This way, I know you're enjoying this content, and I can continue to bring you these biblical revelations we rarely hear. It'll just be a second, then we'll return to our discovery. When Rachel gave Bilhah to Jacob, she said, "That you may bear children on my knees." This was a custom of the time known as proxy marriage. Bilhah would not simply be a surrogate mother, she would become Jacob's wife, with rights and status within the family. The same happened with Zilpah. When Leah realized she had stopped conceiving, she followed her sister's example. She took Zilpah, her maidservant, and gave her to her husband as a wife. Genesis 30:9. Note that the biblical text uses the word woman, not just maidservant. These women experienced a complex transition from domestic servants to wives and mothers of the future tribes of Israel. Imagine the psychological pressure, the emotional adjustment, the need to find their place in a family already rife with tension and rivalry. Bilhah and Zilpah became much more than anyone could have imagined. But we still don't know which of them carries the secret that would change our perspective on this story forever. The time has come to meet the forgotten protagonist of this story, Bilhah, the woman who gave birth to warriors and changed the destiny of a nation. Bilhah was Rachel's servant from a young age. She likely grew up observing the wedding preparations, her mistress's dreams, and her expectations of motherhood. When Rachel was unable to conceive, Bilhah became the solution, but she also carried an immense emotional burden. Her two sons, Dan and Naphtali, were not just numbers in Jacob's genealogy. Dan means judgment. Rachel said, "God has judged me and has also listened to my voice." And Naphtali means my wrestling. With great wrestling, I have competed with my sister and have prevailed. Each name carries the emotional intensity of the moment. But here's what few realize. Bilhah wasn't just an instrument in the dispute between Rachel and Leah. She became the mother of tribes that would mark the history of Israel. The tribe of Dan produced judges like Samson. The tribe of Naphtali was known for its speed and military strength. Bilhah produced warriors, leaders, men who would defend the chosen nation. In the silence of her condition, in the anonymity of her existence, Bilhah was writing a fundamental page in the history of salvation, and she didn't even know it. Have you ever stopped to think that half of the tribes of Israel were born to women that history has almost forgotten? Of Jacob's 12 sons, 4 were born to Bilhah and Zilpah: Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. This means that a third of the tribes of Israel originated from these two women who lived outside the main narrative. They were not secondary characters in God's plan, they were co-authors of the story of salvation. The tribe of Gad, son of Zilpah, became known for its military courage. Moses blessed this tribe, saying, "Blessed is he who enlarges Gad. He dwells like a lioness and tears the arm and the crown of the head." The tribe of Asher, also a son of Zilpah, was prophesied by Jacob as a prosperous tribe. The bread of Asher will be abundant, and he will yield royal dainties. These sons were not second class because their mothers were servants. In Jacob's will, all 12 sons received equal blessings and inheritances. In the division of the promised land, the tribes descended from Bilhah and Zilpah received territories as valuable as the others. What does this teach us? That God makes no distinction between social background, status, or position. He looks at the heart, the purpose, the potential that exists in every human life, regardless of how the world classifies it. As it is written in 1 Samuel 16:7, "Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." And God was seeing something special in these women that the world has chosen to forget. The Bible has an interesting characteristic. It preserves names, genealogies, and details of people who seemed insignificant at the time. But why were Bilhah and Zilpah forgotten for so long? Perhaps the answer lies in how we perceive value and importance. For centuries, the biblical narrative was told with a focus on kings, prophets, and prominent social figures. Women already had less space in ancient narratives, and women in servitude had even less. This reveals something about us, not about the Bible. We tend to pay more attention to stories that confirm our ideas about success, power, and relevance. The story of Bilhah and Zilpah makes us uncomfortable because it questions these criteria. They weren't queens, they weren't rich, they didn't have political power, yet they gave birth to entire tribes. The historical silence surrounding these women also shows us how social prejudice can influence how we read and interpret Scripture. How many other powerful stories are out there, waiting to be rediscovered by unbiased eyes? But perhaps this forgetting was not just a historical accident. Perhaps it was necessary so that now, at this moment, we could rediscover a truth that our generation needs to hear. There is something profoundly powerful about those who transform the world from the margins, from silence, from invisibility. Bilhah and Zilpah's names were not sung. They were not given honorary titles. They were not remembered in solemn speeches. But their children carried the Abrahamic promise through the generations. Their descendants marched in the desert, conquered territories, defended the faith, and preserved the lineage that would lead to the Messiah. They represent all the people who make a difference without receiving credit, the mothers who sacrifice dreams for their children, the workers who build without being seen, the intercessors who pray without being seen, those who serve without expecting recognition. Their invisibility wasn't a flaw in God's plan, it was part of it, because God has a way of using those the world considers insignificant to accomplish extraordinary things. He chooses the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. And God chose the weak things of the world to shame the things which are mighty. And if you feel invisible today, forgotten, unimportant, this story is for you. Because God is about to show you that He works in ways the world could never understand. We have come to the moment to connect all the dots and see the complete picture of what Bilhah and Zilpah represent in salvation history. Their children not only became tribes of Israel, they actively participated in shaping the identity of the chosen people. When Jesus was born, He came not only from the lineage of Judah, but from a people made up of 12 tribes, including those descended from these two forgotten women. The New Testament mentions the 12 tribes as a complete unit, making no distinction between children of chief or servant wives. In Revelation, when John describes the New Jerusalem, he sees 12 gates bearing the names of the 12 tribes, including Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. The forgotten women are literally written on the gates of the eternal city. This leads us to a powerful conclusion. A life's legacy is not measured by the recognition it receives in the present, but by the impact it has on the future. Bilhah and Zilpah may have lived in the shadows, but their descendants walked in the light of God's promise for millennia. How many people today are living thinking that their lives are unimportant, without knowing that they are being instruments of God for changes that will only be revealed in the next generations? And now we come to the revelation I promised from the beginning, the deeper truth that Bilhah's story teaches us about the character of God. God does not operate according to the world's criteria. While we value position, power, and prestige, He values heart, faithfulness, and purpose. Bilhah and Zilpah were never forgotten by God, only by us. They were at the center of His plans from the beginning. This story teaches us that every life has an intrinsic value that is independent of human recognition. Each person carries the potential for impact that can transcend generations. Every person, invisible to the world, can be chosen by God. Jacob's other wife, whom almost no one remembers, reminds us of something fundamental. God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. He writes eternal stories through temporarily forgotten lives. And today, as you listen to this story, perhaps God is whispering to your heart, you too are valuable. You too have purpose. You too are part of something bigger than you can imagine. As Jesus said in Matthew 25:40, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. Bilhah was one of those little ones whom God transformed into a giant of faith. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment telling us which part resonated with you most. Share this video with someone who needs to know that God also sees and values their life. Bilhah, Jacob's other wife, whom almost no one remembers, taught us that no matter how invisible you feel today, you are in the hands of a God who transforms the forgotten into the unforgettable, the marginalized into protagonists, and untold stories into eternal legacies. Subscribe to the channel to discover more forgotten biblical figures who changed the history of salvation. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any revelations. And remember, your story is still being written, and God has plans for you that go far beyond what your eyes can see today. Just as Bilhah created warriors in silence, you too can be creating transformations that will only be revealed in eternity.